In the beginning of the book, McCarthy introduces us to people whose lives have reached a kind of breaking point. A wife married to an alcoholic, a mother making a seemingly impossible choice, a woman facing cancer, and also the betrayal of a partner. They are ordinary people in extreme circumstances. Their stories set the stage for the main realization: you can't change someone else, but you can change how you respond. Through their journeys we see that what keeps many people stuck is the battle to be right. The book frames this battle as a losing war. When you insist on being right, you often sacrifice connection, joy, and peace. McCarthy's message: we must lose the battle of being right to win the war of being happy. She shows how, when someone is in destruction, be it addiction, betrayal, or illness, the instinct is to fight, to fix, to rescue. But the true turning point comes when they stop resisting what is and begin changing themselves. One of the key moments in the narratives happens when characters finally face acceptance. Acceptance here is radical, not condoning destructive behavior, but recognizing the reality of the situation and your part in it. McCarthy argues that once you accept, you give up the tug-of-war. The rope is dropped. Suddenly freedom appears, either for you, or for both. So many stories in the book illustrate that when the person we want to change is no longer being pulled by our expectation to change, some of them do change anyway, only when they feel free of our need. Another thread running through the book is forgiveness, of self and others. One painful story: the woman dying of cancer who must learn to forgive her cheating husband. Forgiveness is shown not as a gift you give to someone else, but as something you do for yourself so you don't remain chained to pain. In forgiving, you release the need to watch the person who hurt you, you release the past, you release resentment. That doesn't mean you stay in harm's way, sometimes you leave. But the underlying shift is internal. McCarthy uses narrative after narrative to show that healing happens when you stop trying to force an outcome outside yourself. She describes that real change comes first from within, our thoughts, our reactions, our mindset. She writes that, nothing changes until we do. When the characters change how they relate, how they respond, how they define their own value, then the external world begins to change as well, sometimes dramatically, sometimes quietly. There is also a strong emphasis on taking responsibility, not in the sense of blame, but in the sense of owning your inner world. When you give up trying to control or change another person's behavior, you reclaim your power. In one case, a son opens his heart to forgiveness and in so doing stops being a victim of circumstances and becomes a creator of his own peace. The book invites you to ask, what if my priority became relationship instead of being right? What if I became healed instead of proving something? In practical terms, the book offers tools and shifts of perspective rather than a rigid program. For example, the act of letting go of the need for someone else to get it, to change, to be someone else, that is itself transformational. It doesn't mean you stay in a toxic situation. It means you stop waiting for someone else's awakening and you start yours. McCarthy suggests that at the moment you stop holding the rope, the dynamic changes, either the relationship falls away or becomes something different. Either way, you're no longer stuck. One of the most powerful ideas McCarthy shares is that your story is the story. She writes that while each story is particular, it resonates because you can see yourself in it. The pain, the stuckness, the hope, the breakthrough, those are universal. When you read about someone hitting rock bottom, you might recognize yourself in another guy's. The book invites you into a deeper compassion for your own journey. There is transcendence in the ordinary, that is another theme. The title, The Power of the Possible, refers to the possibility of something unexpected, of healing that seems improbable, of relationships restored in ways that were once unimaginable. In each story, the possible is revealed when resistance drops, when judgment softens, when love, in its truest form, shows up. It is not about perfection, it is about opening to what might be. The book also emphasizes the role of choice. It doesn't deny that we are hurt, or that other people have done wrong, or that external circumstances can be brutal. But it affirms that even in the worst of circumstances, there is a moment of choice: stay in suffering, or move toward healing. The moment you recognize you have choice, possibilities open up. The stories show that after the choice, action follows, and sometimes miraculous shifts. When a woman who believed her husband would never change instead let go of that belief, the husband changed. Or, when someone stopped needing the partner to be different, they found themselves free, even if the other never changed. The emotional tone of the book is raw and real. McCarthy doesn't sanitize the pain. She brings you into the despair, the exhaustion, the crisis, and then invites you into the turn. That rawness makes it actionable. Because when you recognize your own rawness in someone else's story, you're more likely to stop pretending and start healing. The writer acts as a guide, not a professor, telling story not doctrine. One reviewer called it, the world's most practical guide to quantum jumping. Towards the end of the book, the tapestry of stories weaves together into a kind of map for transformation. You reach a limit, something has to give, you surrender the need to be right, you accept what is, you reclaim personal responsibility, you forgive, you open to the possible. Then your life changes. Sometimes it changes by someone else changing, more often by your own internal shift. The result is freedom, freedom to stay or leave, freedom to love anyway, freedom to live differently. In applying the book's wisdom, you're encouraged to notice the relationship patterns you're entangled in. When you find yourself repeating the same battle, consider, who am I trying to change? What if I stopped? What is my part in the dynamic? Then choose a new act, release judgment, set a boundary, walk away, or stay with acceptance. Then observe what happens. That observation often becomes the next step of awareness. McCarthy teaches that this kind of mindful, courageous act creates ripples you can't yet see. Finally, the overarching message, hope is real. The possible is real. Healing is not merely a distant ideal, she shows it is tangible and reachable. Even if your story has been long and painful. Even if you don't see how you'll ever be free. The book invites you into a new horizon, your life can shift. Your relationships can shift. And often they do, not because you changed someone else, but because you changed your relation to them and to yourself.